Have you ever been sitting in a class or on a bus or just out in public, and you get this weird feeling like someone is watching you? And then you turn around and yeah, someone really is staring right at you. It happens so often that most people just assume it is normal, like some kind of sixth sense that tells you when eyes are on you. But here's the thing. Scientists have actually tried to test this idea for over 100 years, and what they found is way stranger and way more interesting than just having a sixth sense. Back in the 1890s, a psychologist named Edward Titchener got so many letters and reports from people claiming they could feel eyes on them that he decided to actually study it. He set up experiments where people sat with their backs to another person who would either stare at them or not stare at them, and the person in front had to guess whether they were being watched. Titchener found that people were not any better than random chance at guessing correctly, but he noticed something else that ended up being way more important than the original question. People still felt certain they were being watched even when they guessed wrong, and that confidence never went away no matter how many times they failed the test. That gap between how sure people felt and how wrong they actually were is really the whole mystery packed into one experiment. More than a century later, a biologist named Rupert Sheldrake decided to run his own large-scale version of this same idea, and it turned into one of the most debated experiments in psychology. Sheldrake had thousands of people take turns staring at the back of another person's head or looking away, and the person being watched had to guess which one was happening. He claimed his results showed people guess correctly more often than chance would predict, and he argued this proved some kind of real staring sensation existed. But when other scientists tried to repeat his experiments under stricter conditions, controlling for things like sound cues, reflections, and the order in which trials were run, the effect disappeared almost completely. This became a classic example in psychology of why controls matter so much, because small, unintentional cues like a change in someone's breathing or a slight shift in their chair can leak information without either person realizing it. So if we cannot actually sense staring with some invisible energy or extra sense, why does this feeling happen so often and feel so real? The answer comes down to a mix of psychology, biology, and something researchers call the feeling of being stared at effect. And it is honestly one of the best examples of how your brain tricks you into believing something that is not really happening the way you think it is. The first big piece of this puzzle is peripheral vision. Your eyes are constantly picking up movement and shapes around you, even when you are not directly looking at something. Peripheral vision is not great at detail, but it is extremely good at picking up motion. And one of the biggest movement cues your brain is wired to notice is another person's head turning or their body shifting toward you. So even if you are staring straight ahead at your phone, part of your brain in the background is scanning the edges of your vision. And if it picks up someone moving in a way that looks like they might be looking at you, it sends up a little alert. That alert feels like a mysterious sensation of being watched, but really it's just your visual system doing its job in the background without you consciously realizing it. Your peripheral vision has a much wider field than your central focus, roughly 180 degrees compared to just a couple degrees of sharp detail. So it is basically running its own separate scan of the world at all times, feeding information to your brain that never quite reaches full conscious awareness until something in it seems important enough to flag. The second piece is how insanely good humans are at detecting faces and eyes specifically. There is a part of your brain called the fusiform face area that is basically dedicated to recognizing faces faster than almost anything else you see. Studies using eye tracking technology have shown that humans lock onto eyes before almost any other feature in a scene, even in busy environments with lots of people. This makes sense evolutionarily because for most of human history, noticing if a predator or a rival person was staring at you could be the difference between staying safe and getting hurt. So your brain treats detecting a gaze as a top priority survival skill, which means it is constantly working in the background trying to detect eye contact from any angle it can, including out of the corner of your eye. This is not unique to humans either. Researchers studying animals like birds and lizards have found that many species will flee the instant they detect direct eye contact from a predator, even before any other movement happens, which suggests this obsession with tracking gaze goes back a very long way on the evolutionary timeline, way before humans even existed. Now here is where it gets really interesting. Because your brain is so tuned to detect gaze, it sometimes triggers a false alarm. You might feel like someone is staring at you even if they are just looking in your general direction, or even if nobody is looking at you at all. This is called a false positive, and your brain is actually designed to have a lot of these because the cost of missing a real stare is much higher than the cost of feeling paranoid for no reason.
Imagine two scenarios. One where you feel like someone is watching you and you turn around and nobody is, and another where you completely miss the fact that someone actually is staring at you with bad intentions. Your brain would rather you feel a little embarrassed turning around for nothing than risk missing a real threat. So it is tuned to be overly sensitive rather than perfectly accurate. This kind of thinking shows up all over psychology, and it is usually called error management theory, which basically says that when the cost of two mistakes is unequal, your brain will happily make the cheaper mistake way more often if it means avoiding the expensive one.
Then there is the social side of this. Humans are extremely social creatures, and we care a lot about what other people think of us, so our brains are constantly monitoring social cues even without us realizing it. Researchers have found that people are more likely to report feeling watched in situations where they already feel self-conscious, like in a crowded room or in an unfamiliar place. This means the feeling is not just about actual visual detection, it is also tied to your emotional state and how exposed or vulnerable you feel in that moment. Some studies on social anxiety have even found that people who already feel nervous in social situations report the sensation of being watched far more often than people who feel relaxed, which suggests your emotional baseline can turn up or down the sensitivity of this whole detection system, almost like a dial that shifts depending on how safe you feel in a given environment. So when you put all of this together, what is actually happening when you feel like someone is staring at you and you turn around and they are, is a mix of your peripheral vision catching real movement, your brain's obsession with detecting eyes and faces, your tendency toward false alarms because it is safer to overreact, and your general social awareness picking up on subtle cues you're not consciously processing. It feels like some invisible force telling you to turn around, but it's really just your brain running a highly advanced background program that's been fine-tuned over millions of years of evolution. There is also a simpler explanation for some of these moments that people often overlook, which is coincidence combined with memory bias. If you turn around 100 times in your life because you feel like someone is watching you, and 90 of those times nobody was actually looking, you probably will not remember most of those misses. But the 10 times you turned around and someone really was staring, those moments stick in your memory because they feel meaningful and slightly eerie. This is called confirmation bias, and it means your brain naturally holds onto the hits and forgets the misses, which makes the feeling of being watched seem way more accurate and mysterious than it statistically actually is. Think about how many times you have glanced up at nothing throughout your entire life without ever noting it down anywhere, versus the handful of times it felt like a spooky coincidence. Your brain is not keeping an honest scoreboard, it's keeping a highlight reel. What's wild is that some researchers have tried to test this in more controlled modern settings, using cameras and screens instead of face-to-face staring, removing any chance of subtle body language or peripheral vision cues. In those digital experiments, where a person is being watched only through a camera with no possibility of picking up movement or peripheral cues, most people could not detect being watched better than random guessing. This backs up the idea that it's not some extrasensory power, it's specifically tied to real physical and biological cues that only work when you're in the same physical space as someone else. Interestingly, some of these same studies found that people still reported strong gut feelings of being watched during the camera trials, even when their actual guesses were no better than chance, which lines up perfectly with what Titchener noticed all the way back in the 1890s. The feeling of certainty and the actual accuracy of that feeling seem to be almost completely disconnected from each other. There is one more layer to this that ties everything together, which is how your brain handles ambiguous information in general. Whenever your senses pick up something unclear, whether it's a shadow that might be a shape or a sound that might be a voice, your brain doesn't just leave that information hanging. It fills in the gaps using whatever context feels most likely, and it often leans toward interpretations that keep you safe rather than interpretations that are boring or neutral. Feeling like someone might be staring at you fits that pattern perfectly. It costs you almost nothing to glance over your shoulder, but it could save you from missing something important. So your brain leans toward this interpretation constantly, almost like a background process that is always slightly biased toward caution. So the next time you get that eerie feeling that someone is staring at you and you turn around and catch their eyes, you are not psychic and you don't have some hidden sixth sense. What you actually have is a brain that evolved over millions of years to be incredibly good at picking up on tiny movements and social cues in your peripheral vision, combined with a built-in bias toward overreacting just in case, and a memory system that makes the hits feel way more significant than the countless misses you never even noticed. It feels like magic, but it's really just your brain being an absolute expert at reading the room, even when you're not paying attention to the room at all.